Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that gets missed when we have these conversations about maxing out. And, people will see guys like me, and I'm not even a remotely rare person in the strength world with what I'm doing. And I want people to grasp that for a moment, even though this is what I do on my channel. I'm one of the very few guys promoting this system in the powerlifting, strength world, even elite sports world. This training style is relatively common. Okay, it's not my invention, it's not rare, it's not only used by a handful of champions. It is extremely common. It's a very common training system. But when we max out on these wide variety of exercises, people will say, well, it doesn't carry over, it doesn't count, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I don't know what you guys believe as far as something not carrying over, but let me ask you a question. If you came in and you did 5 reps with 80% of your 1 rep max on a classic lift, would that have more carryover than doing a true 1 rep max on a variation of it to your 1 rep max? Every good coach who understands how maxing works would tell you that maxing out on the variation has better carryover. Okay? Why? People to think about that. Well, a lot of times people who would argue the other would say, well, you're practicing the exact groove and movement pattern and whatever of the classic lift. With submaximal weight, that doesn't help. And that's what people forget with this. They are thinking like an Olympic lifter, a weightlifter. Okay, those guys have very technical lifts that you get great benefits from executing correct movement over and over and over and over and over and over and over to learn the technique, because they're highly technical lifts. The squat, bench, and deadlift are not that technical. They're very easy to learn. Now people say, no, they're not, they weren't for me. Relative to the clean and jerk, relative to a proper snatch, they are 100 times easier to learn. I've taken people and taught them to perform a perfect deadlift in a single training session, and for the rest of their life they have a perfect deadlift they could walk into a meet and compete with at the competitive level in a single training session. Okay? And you do that with a clean and jerk? I don't think so. So your technique practice doesn't do a lot. It helps you set up more, but if you just did a bunch of singles, that would be better, because you would practice setting up and unracking the weight and walking out and setting your back and all that more. You would get more practice by doing a bunch of singles than you would doing the technique work, because that's the only technique you're getting benefit from, is learning the setup. Because your technique and bar path and biomechanics with 80% of your max is not anything like what your true max looks like. Now, we can try to do it, we can practice it, but it's not going to be the same. It will not be the same movement. Your technique changes when you start hitting 90% and above. All right? A max deadlift does not look like your volume training. It doesn't look like it. Same thing with your squat and your bench press. It's a very different movement. Do you want to know what is specific? Learning to max out. Now, people would look at that and say, well, you can't max out all the time, so how could you learn the technique you're talking about if you can't max out every week? Yeah, you're right. If you hit a true 1 rep max on the classic bench or squat every week, you're going to have problems. There can be problems with that. Overuse, injuries, connective tissue stuff, burnout. But that doesn't happen when we're rotating lifts all the time. It doesn't happen when we're rotating lifts all the time. But then people will say, but it's not the same movement. You're not practicing it. What do you mean we're not practicing it? We are practicing it. You're telling me with a box squat against chains that you don't practice maxing out? As you ramp the weight up, you find your groove. Okay, what do you do in a competition when you hit your competition lift? Let's say you do a back squat at a powerlifting meet or a strength lifting meet. You do several warm-up attempts in the back room, in the break room, the warm-up room, right? or you ramp and get progressively heavier and you get into your groove. A lot of guys don't think about that. They don't realize you have to get into your groove. That's why we warm up. That's why we ramp up, to get into your groove, to find your groove. Because you know what? You probably haven't hit a max back squat in a week or two. You haven't had a lot of practice at it. Unless you're running Bulgarian training where you max every day with that same lift, which has its own set of overuse issues, which I've learned from past experience. Okay, you haven't had the practice, so you ramp up. You find your groove on that exercise, and guess what? Your groove is going to be slightly different. You're in a slightly different rack than the one you train in normally. The bar might have a slight degree more or less whip. You might be wearing slightly different clothing. Okay. It's different than what you've been practicing anyways to some extent. So you ramp up, and then when you get out on the platform, you get 3 attempts that hopefully each one is heavier than the last. And in a perfect world, the third one is a lifetime PR for you. Right? That's a perfect world. So your last lift in a perfect meet where everything is perfect, your third heavy max attempt is a lifetime PR in best case scenario. So you grind, you rep up. You get used to it. You get to it to the point where you have to grind. A lot of times it's hard, it's heavy, and you ramp to a max. Well, what do you think you're doing when you max out every week with a different variation? Aren't you doing the same thing? What is it that we're practicing? We're practicing finding our groove on a new exercise that we haven't maxed on in a while. Okay? On the ramp up, we find our groove, just like you do in competition. That is the same skill. You're learning the skill of how to max out. Hopefully that's starting to click for people at this point. You are learning how to max out. Because I can tell you right now, someone who's done nothing but a 5x5 and built a big base, you throw a 1 rep max at them and they suck at it. Okay, if I have you do a 5x5 squat and a 5x5 bench press to build a good muscle and strength base, what do you think your max is going to do? Do you think your max is going to be calculated off that 5x5 and that you're going to have done 5x5 with 83% of your max when you go to test it? No. Your max isn't going to be 17% heavier than the weight you've handled because you haven't practiced maxing out. You've practiced that exercise. I mean, every workout, you've done 25 moderately heavy reps. You still suck at maxing out. Your max will suck. All right? Your max will suck if you have done nothing but 5x5. Maxing out is a skill, and it doesn't mean just to the specific lift you're doing it on. This system lets us practice maxing out against new lifts all the time. And learning how to strain, learning how to grind, learning how to find your groove as you add weight every single, going all the way up until it gets really hard. The same thing you do in competition. Okay, and if you've done 20 different squats this way through the year, when you get to your classic squat in comp and you have to ramp it to a max, guess what? You do the exact same thing you did on those other 20. It's the same process. But in this case, it helps us expose more weaknesses. It helps us stay fresh. It helps us avoid overuse injuries. And we get good at maxing out. Because if you max on 50 different exercises every year to a 1 rep max, you get really good at just maxing out. It makes you good at it. You've had a lot of practice. But you can do this more often with less risk of injury than you can on your classic lifts. And you're always having to max against an uncertain load, so you don't care if you miss your groove. You get strong at all your weak links on all these different bars and chains and bands and whatever it is that you're doing, so that when you get pulled out of your groove, you've built all the musculature to lift it even if you get pulled out of your groove. Therefore, your groove matters less. Right? This teaches you how to max out. It has full carryover to the skill of maxing. Because maxing is a skill. It's not the exercise specifically that is the skill. It's the act of maxing out that is the skill. And a bunch of practice at 85% of a classic lift will not make you better at maxing at it, other than the muscle that it builds. Alright guys, well that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.